Congratulations to each of you for your nominations. I'm going to begin, Ms. Hooker, with you. You talked about tariffs and described them as an effort by the president to address trade imbalances, and I just want to give you a perspective from this side of the dais. I view the president's announcement last week as a $6 trillion tax increase on American families. The president's economic advisor, Peter Navarro, said that these tariffs will raise $6 trillion over 10 years, $600 billion a year, and Virginia families and businesses are going to pay for it. And that's why the markets are in turmoil. That's why my Virginia farmers are worried, because they use fertilizer with potash, and it all comes, 80% of it comes from Canada. That's why my shipbuilders and sub-builders, where 35% of the aluminum and steel come from Canada, they view this as a $6 trillion tax increase. Now, you asserted, and the president has, that it's designed to address trade imbalances. Okay, if that's the case, why did the president impose tariffs on nations like Brazil, Netherlands, Australia, and others where we have a trade surplus, where we don't have a trade deficit? If it's designed to address trade imbalances, why did he impose tariffs on Israel and Singapore, who have no tariffs on U.S. products? Maybe it's about adversaries over allies, but wait a minute, why put a 17% tariff on Israel and a 10% tariff on Iran? Why put a higher tariff on Taiwan than on Canada? This, I know, is justified as an effort to address trade imbalances, but if you just go down the list of countries and you look at the tariffs that are imposed, the calculation and the numbers for these countries suggest something else is going on. And I think that something else is a $6 trillion tax increase. And the administration and the leaders here, many have made plain that the goal is use that tax increase to then fund a tax cut for the wealthiest. So I hope you're right, and that this is going to help us on the trade imbalance side. But again, if that was the goal, why go after Australia? Why go after Brazil? Why go after the UK? Why go after the Netherlands? Why go after Singapore when we have trade surpluses with those nations? And so I don't really have a question about tariffs, but I just want to challenge an assertion that it's about trade imbalances when so many of the nations that are getting socked by tariffs, that's not really a challenge that we have with them. To both Ms. Rogers and Ms. Hooker, let me now move over and to ask about the president dismantling the U.S. Agency for Global Media. I appreciated Ms. Rogers saying, we got to be for the First Amendment. I agree. I was glad that a court ruled yesterday that the Associated Press couldn't be kicked out of the White House press pool because they will use the phrase Gulf of Mexico rather than Gulf of America. That was standing up for the First Amendment. I'm pleased to see the progress of cases in courts where people are challenging being deported for making statements that are politically unpopular, but for not committing any criminal activity. But how are we benefited by dismantling the agency that funds Radio Marti? So Radio Marti, I was a missionary in Honduras. Radio Marti transmits pro-democracy and good, solid information into the repressive Cuban regime where people can't get access to information. Ms. Hooker, I think you were on the board of Radio Free Asia, one of the component programs within the U.S. Agency for Global Media. How do we benefit public diplomacy or our broader political goals by dismantling the agency that is giving people who are oppressed information that they can rely on and be inspired by? Either one of you is fine.
Thank you, Senator, for that question. So, if confirmed as the Undersecretary for Public Diplomacy, I would not, under the current configuration, oversee any of the components of AGM. If at some point any of those were placed under my purview, I would commit to, really analyzing, getting right in on each of these proposed cuts, each of these programs, because I absolutely agree, messaging on the issues the Senator references, that's of value, and we would really want to make sure that every dollar we spend is making America safer, stronger, and more prosperous, and I'd be happy to report back to the committee on that, once I'm in there, to the extent that any of those are under my purview. Also, if confirmed, in the event that I were the Secretary's designee to the board of AGM, I would commit to be a responsible fiduciary and fulfill all of my duties and steward the mission of that entity and each dollar that it spends and each channel that it runs.
about your work on the board of Radio Free Asia. I mean, my sense is that is a very valuable program in terms of promoting a good image of the United States and giving hope to people who may live under oppressive regimes. How does it serve our diplomatic interest to shutter that?
Thank you, Senator, for your question and for your comments previous to that as well. I appreciate you sharing your views. Correct. I was on the board of Radio Free Asia. I was invited to be on the board because of my background on North Korea and the work that I had done on the Korean Peninsula for more than 2 decades. And as my colleague said, the review that's underway that is aimed at looking at how we present American messaging about the American values and our interests, the review is underway to make sure that the audiences we're trying to reach are being reached. And if I'm confirmed, I look forward to working with my colleague, if confirmed, on these issues, and happy to work with the committee on that as well.
Can I just follow up really quick and just say, when you were on the board of Radio Free Asia, were you trying to do messaging that would help inspire North Koreans who were living under a very oppressive government?
Yes, the messaging aimed at North Korea was to let them see the outside world.
Yeah. Again, North Korea, Cuba, these are populations that need to hear from the United States. And so as that review is done, I hope we reach the conclusion that we're not just going to be silent and fail to communicate with people who really need a pro-democracy message. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. Senator Ricketts.